Hello, hello, and welcome. The Food Well Alliance and the Law Farm presents the Farm Law Webinar Series. And this is the May 2022 webinar, and we're going to be talking about food safety for Georgia farmers tonight. I can't thank Food Well Alliance enough for their support, as the Law Farm is a resource provider organization for Food Well Alliance. And the generous funding and support that Food Well Alliance provides makes resources like this completely free and available to farmers in Georgia. And there are also opportunities to continue working with me one-on-one, especially for farms that are in the 5-county area that Food Well Alliance supports. And I'll talk more about that towards the end of the presentation tonight. There is so much under the umbrella of food safety. So I want to narrow down what we're talking about in this webinar so that you don't go through the whole thing and then wonder, well, where was this piece of information? So on this webinar, I'm going to talk about what laws and regulations and licenses apply to different types of produce specifically, and different levels of processing for different types of farm products possibly. So when you take produce to turn it into a value-added product, what types of laws and regulations and licenses change or fluctuate when you're doing different levels of processing. And we're going to talk about this at the federal, state, and local levels of government, because all of them do play a role in food safety and food regulation and food licensing. So we're going to go through some different levels of government and talk about the laws and regulations and licenses that apply. And then we're going to talk about resources to navigate the varying requirements, because there are so many things that apply when you're doing this. They don't apply when you're doing that. They apply maybe for this. The resources are super helpful, knowing who to call, knowing who to ask, knowing what websites to go to. So we're going to go over some resources that you can use to navigate them as we go through the laws and regulations and licenses that apply to food safety in Georgia. And we're going to talk about your 2 strongest allies in protecting your farm business from a food safety nightmare. Lay down. Spoiler alert, they're insurance and knowing the statutes that exist. Those are the strongest allies to protect your farm business from a food safety nightmare. And if we don't cover what you have in mind as a question on this webinar, there are more farmtrepreneur resources and webinar updates on Instagram of what's coming next, of what's already been recorded. So follow at the.law.farm on Instagram to make sure you're getting real-time updates, what's going on, and to keep an eye out to see if your questions are answered there, or to figure out or learn how you can ask a question to me directly. Oh, and my name is Michelle, by the way. I'm Michelle Namer, the founder and the attorney for The Law Farm. And mark your calendars. In July, we're going to be talking about Georgia hemp laws. In August, we're going to have a workshop, and the workshop's different than the webinars. The workshop is to actually get work done while we're together. And the aim is to go ahead and put some of these things that I talk about in the webinar in place with each other as community, make that concerted time. So in August, we're going to have a workshop with what's missing in your most important contract. And we all have a different contract that is most important to our business. I have mine. Mine is my attorney-client engagement letter when I'm actually representing clients. That's my most important contract. So I'm going to have some things on Instagram that are going to help you whittle down what is your most important contract. And in that workshop, we're going to actually go through it. We're going to talk about every type of clause you might see in a contract and find what's missing in your most important contract and get it in there. In October, we're going to have an employment law webinar. And in November, we're going to have a record keeping workshop. And I'm going to just drill all kinds of quick and dirty tips for making sure you're keeping records of agreements, of sales, where they went, where you sold them, what part of your property it came from, all sorts of different types of record keeping, because we're going to talk about some of the requirements for record keeping for food safety And so we'll just go over some quick and dirty tips in that workshop. And I want you to have your laptop with you, have your computer be in your home office, and start setting up these quick and dirty things, or more advanced and involved record keeping, whatever level you feel like you're at with keeping those records. We're going to take you to the next level if you want to go there. So I've mentioned it already, maybe a couple of times, that food safety has a lot of moving parts in it. There's a lot of topics to cover in food safety. Just to illustrate the breadth of food safety, this is just a list, a brainstorming list of aspects of food safety liability. There's federal laws and regulations. You may have heard of FSMA. We're going to go in detail about FSMA a little bit tonight. There's state rules and regulations. There's a whole separate body of law about product liability, common law, statutes. I mean, there's just an entire product liability rules and regulations aspect to food safety. There's licensing and registration requirements. There's food safety liability insurance. That's one of your allies. And there's different standards for different kinds of food. If you have carrots, it's going to have a different set of rules and regulations than if you have dried lima beans that you're selling. The different products, different kinds of food that you're making available are going to come with different food safety rules and regulations around them, and different amounts of liability, right? Romaine lettuce was a big culprit for a lot of foodborne illness. I say recently, I can't remember how many years it's been, because there were 2 years recently that kind of messed it all up. But the romaine lettuce that made everybody sick, romaine lettuce comes with a lot of liability because you're taking it out of the ground and consumers are going to consume it in the form that it came. It's going to be something that comes out of the refrigerator and into somebody's bowl and then into their system. It just comes with more liability of there being a foodborne microorganism at that point than a product like a dried lima bean, where it has been, it's dried. So that moisture that microbes love is technically gone. And then there's another step that the consumer is going to take in cooking that product. And that takes away some of the liability of just selling fresh beans versus dried lima beans. So there's different standards for different kinds of food, for different types of products. It just gets very involved, and it can quickly feel overwhelming, and it can quickly be something that's easy to just put on the back burner and sort of think, I'll worry about this later. Well, let's try and demystify some of that together and dive into it and see that you can break it down into what you're selling, to what your business plan is, and then start moving forward with what food safety rules and regulations apply to you, and how you can start maximizing your own farm protections and liability protections in line with that. So just as there are many aspects that play a role in food safety liability, there is food safety alphabet soup. There's FSMA, USDA, GDA, FDA, GAP, HACCP, OCGA, FSIS. And I remembered after making these slides that FSMA has a section that is often referred to as just the PSR, the Produce Safety Rules. And there are GMPs, which are good manufacturing practices. So this isn't all of the alphabet soup. There are so many acronyms out there for food safety. It can be a little overwhelming. So let's just at least start here with some that you're going to see tonight. Also, to point out how bogged down you can get in this stuff, there are 13 federal agencies that are included in food safety. 13 federal agencies. That's just the feds. That's not even the state or getting into local zoning issues. That's just federal. So take a deep breath with food safety. We'll figure out the moving parts. You'll get your standard operating procedures in line. You'll feel confident, and we'll keep people safe when they're eating food. So FSMA is the Food Safety and Modernization Act. USDA is the United States Department of Agriculture. GDA is the Georgia Department of Agriculture. FDA is the Food and Drug Administration. GAP is Good Agricultural Practices. HACCP is the Hazardous Analysis and Critical Control Points. And OCGA is the official code of Georgia annotated. And FSIS is Food Safety and Inspection Service, which is part of the USDA. It comes into play when there's meat involved, usually. And then I just want to, right off the bat, mention some great resources to farmers in Georgia, specifically Georgia Organics. Georgia Organics has phenomenal resources. They have farm services directly, and they also have some great food safety resources with their farm to school program. So Georgia Organics is a great place to reach out to if you have questions, in addition to the Law Farm. And Farm Commons. If you have a farm business, you're planning a farm business, you're running a farm business, and you haven't visited the Farm Commons website, I highly suggest you stop everything you're doing right now and go check them out. Rachel Armstrong started Farm Commons and created just this comprehensive library of where to start with a lot of legal issues that farms face. When I do these webinars, I do it from a Georgia perspective, but I'm very rarely sharing anything that Rachel and her team haven't covered on Farm Commons. I just go into the specifics for Georgia farmers, which there becomes nuance for specific states, and then specific farms have their own nuance too. But the Farm Commons website is a great library to start looking in if you have questions about leases, if you have questions about food safety, if you have questions about business entities. She's got an overview of pretty much every topic, every legal topic that farms face. Farms, I would say in food businesses, but let's stick with farms for right now. And then college websites and ag extensions are also a great place to go. So the regulatory bodies themselves usually have offices and numbers. They're great. I have never called a Georgia Department of Ag or US Department of Ag number or written to an email and not gotten an incredibly pleasant and helpful response back, or at least pointed in the direction of someone who can give me a better response. So the regulatory bodies themselves within college websites and ag extensions do a really good job of demystifying the moving parts. Going to each regulatory body, it doesn't help when you're selling a product or when you're farming something that 5 or 6 different entities play a role in. The college websites and the ag extensions do a good job of breaking down, if you're running this kind of business, these are the places you need to check out, and this is what you need from them. So look for those .edus. The University of Arkansas and the National Agricultural Law Center have great resources. When I was preparing this presentation, Penn State had some resources that were helpful. So check those out. The .edu is your sign that it's a resource you can count on for starting research, for starting to investigate what you need for food safety regulations on your farm and in your enterprise. Reminder, if what you are asking tonight isn't what you have on your mind when you're watching this webinar isn't answered, follow the Law Farm on Instagram and get some more legal updates, get some more nuance in real time. And of course, I'm an attorney, so I come with a disclaimer. This presentation will not provide legal advice. I'm not telling you what you need or don't need. I'm going to provide you with information and education, and I'm going to guide you to transform dense law, confusing law into clear action steps for yourself moving forward. I'm going to empower you to integrate legal tools into your farm business infrastructure, but I am not giving you legal advice. There's no attorney-client relationship created in this webinar, and there's no confidentiality preserved with what you share in this webinar. And so just to break that down a little bit more, legal education is what we're doing tonight. It's researching applicable laws. It's explaining the concept of liability. Legal advice takes your specific situation or your farm specific situation and applies those laws and regulations to your specific business. We're not doing that tonight. So do not leave here thinking that I have told you that this is everything you need to do. I am covering a lot of material. It's not specific to your farm. Seek out an attorney or continue to do your research until you feel confident that you know what your next steps are, or what actually applies and doesn't apply to your farm business in terms of food safety or any other topic. And then legal representation is actually hiring a lawyer to do something specific on your behalf, to apply for a license if a registered agent is allowed to apply in your place, or to write a letter to appeal a decision to withdraw an exemption, to I think those are great examples but legal representation is actually hiring an attorney to do something on your behalf. All right, let's start demystifying and breaking down the different food safety laws, regulations, and licensing that's applicable to Georgia businesses. And let's start with what kind of food you sell. And I've broken it down into sort of 3 categories and then the rest of everything else for tonight's purposes. So the first question you might ask is, are you selling raw produce that's likely to be consumed raw, that's likely to be eaten in the form that you're selling it? Examples are lettuce, greens, carrots, tomatoes. Or are you selling produce to end users that will be cooking the product? The end users will be cooking it. An example of this is lima beans, collard greens, potatoes. Those are more often than not cooked before they are consumed. And again, it removes some of that possibility of foodborne illnesses still being there after the food is prepared. Are you selling processed food like tomato sauce, jams, or hot sauce? And then the kitchen sink option is, are you selling honey, eggs, meat, or dairy? Because they all have different licensing rules and regulations that apply. For all of them, for all of those categories that I just read through, in Georgia, the following acts and causing thereof within this state are prohibited. 1, the manufacture, sale, or delivery, holding, storage, or offering for sale any food that is adulterated or misbranded. And 2, the adulteration or misbranding of any food. Violators can be prosecuted. This is in the official code of Georgia. You cannot sell, deliver, hold, store, or offer for sale any food that is adulterated or misbranded. And this list, I put 1 and 2, but there is an extensive list under OCGA 26-2-22. There's a more extended list of prohibitions around food sales. So I highly suggest, go check that out. Check out that statute, read through it. Just know what Georgia's lawmakers have already prioritized, in terms of standards of food and food sales. And a food shall be deemed adulterated if it has been produced, prepared, packed, or held under unsanitary conditions, whereby it may have become contaminated with filth, or whereby it may have been rendered diseased, unwholesome, or injurious to health. Foodborne microorganisms, particles that cause illness, falls into this realm. I would also like to point out anecdotally, I am a mostly organic, hyper-organic actually gardener. So I have a garden. I don't use chemicals if I don't have to. I will go outside and I will pick a strawberry right from my strawberry patch and eat it. I'm not concerned with a little bit of dirt on there. There's something about farming or gardening sustainably. I'm going to speak anecdotally from my experience. I connect with dirt in a different way than most people around me. And this word filth on this slide in particular sort of triggered this thought of, growing organically, growing hyper sustainably. I have this connection with dirt that's a little bit different than most people. So I have to back myself up sometimes. And in this food safety realm, especially remind myself that what I would consider perfectly fine food to eat, unfortunately, in a very hygienic world, it may not be considered that way on a shelf or for selling. And that's not to spook anybody. I do believe that let me stop there. That's not to spook anybody. It's just a reminder that selling wholesome, good quality, good, clean, fair food. There's my slow food plug. It's the goal at the end of the day. And this is Georgia's law on it. And does your farm need to be registered with the FDA? So we saw what Georgia requires. You just can't sell this food that's adulterated or misbranded. Now let's think federally. Most food sales establishments need to be registered with the FDA. And then I am going to pull up a web page from the National Ag Law Center. They have a lovely flow chart. For do I need to register my farm with the FDA? So the first question, does your farm pack or hold food for human or animal consumption in the US? If yes, is that food grown, raised, or consumed on that farm or another farm under the same ownership? Is it grown, raised, or consumed on that farm? Let's say for most farm entrepreneurs that I work with, they would answer yes to this. If you answered no, you must register. Does your farm process or manufacture food for human or animal consumption in the US? If your answer is no here, you're exempt. I think most of the farm entrepreneurs that I work with would answer yes here. Is that food consumed on that farm or another farm under the same ownership? I would say no for most of the farms I work with. Is the primary function of your farm to sell packed or processed food directly to consumers? I think the packed is the important delineator here. Most of the farm entrepreneurs I work here would answer no to that, and it would be a must register situation. So let me go through that again. I'm just gonna scroll through it slowly so that you can follow it yourself. Pause if you need to. And there's your, do you need to register with the FDA? If you ever receive a notice of violation at any point in time or a notice of withdrawal of exemptions, pay close attention to how long you have to respond, first of all, and then two, find an attorney to help you with the next steps. This slide just kind of like slid in there out of nowhere a little bit, but if you ever receive a notice of violation, pay close attention to how long you have to respond. Find an attorney to help you with the next steps with any of these things that we're about to go over. All right. The list on this slide that has very small writing fruits and vegetables that include artichokes, peaches, currants, honeydews, nectarines, chicory, snow peas, turmeric, cabbage, carrots, all of these things. This is a non-exhaustive list. You could add to this list if you wanted to. All of these things are produce that the federal government deems likely to be consumed raw. These are things that we do eat without cooking them. If you're selling produce that's likely to be consumed raw, FSMA applies to you, the Food Safety Modernization Act, but you may still be exempt. Most of the farms that I work with will fall into an exemption. GAP standards, the good agricultural practices, are voluntary, and a food sales establishment is required from the Georgia Department of Agriculture, and it needs to be renewed yearly. So you have some federal rules that are going to be in play. You have voluntary GAP standards, and you have a food sales establishment license required from the GDA, and that comes with its own requirements as well. So what is FSMA, the Food Safety Modernization Act? This was signed into law in 2011 by President Obama. It is a food safety law dedicated to preventing foodborne illnesses rather than just responding after the fact. And just some quick numbers from the CDC. Annually, there are about 48 million illnesses, foodborne illnesses that or infections, people who become ill. 128,000 hospitalizations, and then 3,000 deaths annually because of foodborne illnesses. And this law is aimed at trying to prevent that from happening rather than just going, uh-oh, when it does happen, and then trying to mitigate damages, recall things, and try to, mitigate damages. FSMA governs and provides guidelines for food safety plans and standards for produce safety, and it's all science-based. FSMA did a huge overhaul of making sure that the guidelines that they used were based in science, were practical, were sound, were peer-reviewed, all of those things. FSMA covers water quality, biological soil amendments, animals, human hygiene, and the hygiene of buildings and structures, the cleanliness of those places. It requires farm registration and record keeping, even for exempt farms. So even if you are exempt from FSMA, you may still need to register and keep records on hand for your farm, certain records. And so this is a list of the possible exemptions from FSMA. One possible exemption is that you only grow produce to sell to processors. If you only grow strawberries to send some to somebody to turn it into strawberry jam and it doesn't go directly to a consumer, then there are some requirements for your relationship with that jam making operation, but you would be exempt from FSMA if you only grow produce to sell to processors. If you sell produce that is rarely consumed raw, and we'll see the FDA list in just a second, it's shorter than that last list. If you sell produce that the FDA and the USDA or that have decided, the FDA, excuse me, that the FDA decided is rarely consumed raw, then you are exempt from FSMA. If your average annual produce sales, and I put an emphasis on produce because we will talk about produce versus food in this exemption realm. If your average annual produce sales over the previous 3 years are less than $25,000, then you are exempt. Or lastly, this last realm we'll go into more detail with, if you are qualified exempt. And let's talk about what that means to be qualified exempt. Also, back up, farm entrepreneurs that I work with that are starting out may fall into that third exemption from FSMA, getting started and building up that bottom line base for your first 3 years as a farm. Likely you're exempt and fall into that third category for most of the farms that I've seen and that I've worked with. So this qualified exemption. Qualified exemption means that on average, you sold more than 25,000 a year of produce over the last 3 years, and you sold less than $5,000 worth of food over the last 3 years. And more than 50% of those food sales are to qualified end users. It's an and thing. So if all three of these things apply, and more than 50% of those food sales are to qualified end users, which means the consumer of the food or a retail food establishment or a restaurant in the same state, the same reservation, are not more than 275 miles away. If all three of these things apply and more than 50% of your food sales are to these qualified end users, then you are qualified exempt. And I think I can safely say that if you don't fall into this third exemption here anymore, then over 90% of the farms that I work with through the law farm are qualified exempts. A note on qualified exemption, there are some records that you need to keep. You do need to register with the federal government. And then I'm going to talk some more about that ally against a food safety nightmare. Even if you are exempt, I highly, highly, highly recommend, from a legal education, from a smart business perspective, highly recommend reading FSMA from top to bottom. Just know what those guideposts are of safe food, of clean food, of well properly handled food. Know what the federal government has published in that sense and emulate it to the best of your ability, period. So what about those foods that aren't likely to be eaten raw? Now let's go to that FDA list. We're going to start there. This second group of foods. Are you selling produce to end users that will be cooking the product, to people who will be further processing this food? The FDA's list of commodities they've identified as rarely consumed raw is here for your perusal, for your screenshotting. That's asparagus, black beans, great northern beans, kidney beans, lima beans. I'm not going to read the entire thing. Collards, ginger, sweet potatoes. I also believe anecdotally it is worth becoming familiar with this list, because as someone who grows my own food, I will say it has changed my perspective on things that I would eat raw or not eat raw. Like sweet corn. There's nothing more delicious in the summer than just a cob of sweet corn. I digress. Just know this list. You don't have to agree with it, but you do have to use it for food safety standards in the United States. That also brings me to another point about the differences between federal and state laws. Sometimes they differ, but always go with the more strict law rather than try to cut corners and then find yourself liable for something. Always, even if the other law governs, always try to follow the strictest rule, especially when it comes to something like food safety. It just doesn't pay for people to be sick. It doesn't pay for to have the bad PR of somebody becoming sick eating something that came off of your farm. So especially with food safety, go with the strictest rules that you find and just emulate those as much as you possibly can cost effectively. So if you're selling produce to end users that are likely to be cooking these things, if it's processed in any way, it requires a food license from the Georgia Department of Agriculture. And this includes chopping or freezing a product. And anytime you're selling food, the food sales establishment is required from the Georgia Department of Agriculture, and that needs to be renewed yearly. There is a long blurb on the internet from the Georgia Department of Ag of what includes a food sales establishment. It does include vegetable stands that are temporary and mobile. In researching for this presentation, I found very rare to no instances where you would be selling produce in Georgia and not need that food sales establishment from the Georgia Department of Ag. That's not to say that, anyway, the legal advice part would be, what exactly are you doing, and does this or does this not apply? That's not the space for tonight, but sitting down for an office hour or consulting an attorney that you already know to discuss this, that will give you that legal advice and that sound clarity that you're looking for. And also know that if you're working with an attorney, though, the sound clarity doesn't always come in as concise of a package as we would all like. It takes a long time to get to know these rules, to get to know these regulations, to catch all the moving parts. So starting with a lawyer who knows farm law is a good start, but even in that case, something could come up and it could be like, oh, wait, you need this license too, and just handle it as it comes, as it unfolds. And so for this, for all of these commodities that are rarely consumed raw, FSMA does not apply. You're exempt from the Food Safety Modernization Act. The USDA GAP participation that's voluntary, I highly recommend in this realm. If FSMA does not apply, go ahead and consider having these voluntary audits to make sure that you're getting a second set of eyes on things, to let somebody else kind of give you an idea of where you could become stronger in your food safety plans, or where you can, maybe even save some money. Maybe you're overdoing it on a section. Just these GAP audits, if you can afford them, if you can make it work, seem like such a great tool for showing that you are taking every step that you can to keep the food that you are growing, harvesting, packaging, selling as safe as you possibly can. And the GAP participation, these are audits that verify fruit and vegetables are produced, packed, handled, and stored to minimize microbial food safety hazards. They're completely voluntary, and they're also at the cost of the farm. Or the cost, yes. Group GAP allows small-scale farmers and food hubs to collectively receive an audit and share costs. So the USDA recognizes that costs do keep farms from being able to have access to some of these things. So check out the Group GAP resource in particular and see if maybe you and a few similarly situated farms could benefit from pooling together to get these sorts of GAP audits. And then we're moving into processed foods. As a farm, part of your business model may be to create value-added products where you can preserve what you are growing. So turning your own strawberries into strawberry jam so that you have something, the strawberries don't go bad, but you have something you can sell people for a little bit more sometimes. So with processed foods, I just wanted to point out in this webinar, the cottage foods law in Georgia. And there seem to be some misconceptions around cottage foods. So I just want to introduce that law. I want to point out that the Law Farm has an extended blog on this at the Law Farm blog. And I really encourage you to check out the Georgia Department of Ag website about cottage foods. They have great resources for you to use. Cottage foods in Georgia, anyone who's using this licensing scheme to prepare foods and then sell them in the state of Georgia must complete an accredited food safety training. And cottage goods sites are subject to inspections. you must obtain a cottage food license, and then there are labeling requirements on your cottage food goods: the business name, the address of the cottage food producer, the name of the product and the ingredients. And then the FDA, so even though this is a Georgia law, the Georgia law gives the FDA the power to govern food allergen labeling and nutritional claims, if there are any. So the cottage foods in Georgia, it's mostly a Georgia state licensing, but FDA does come into play if you have any food allergen labeling and nutritional claims. And this is for processed food. And again, if you are selling these processed goods, your cottage goods, you will likely need a food sales establishment required from the GDA, renewed yearly. And I want to point out the commercial shared kitchens in the area. I just took 4 to do a quick introduction to commercial shared kitchens. This allows you to process foods in a location that's already prepared for the FDA and USDA regulations. And it gives you a chance to learn from other entrepreneurs. I'll go ahead and share one website that stuck out to me. Was the Marty's. I think I'm saying that correctly. I apologize if I am not. Please let me know in the comments if you can spell it out phonetically for me if I said it correctly. So Marty's is in Atlanta. It's a shared kitchen and marketplace, and the mission is to preserve and promote culinary culture. They focus on economic inclusion, business development, and growth opportunities for local food entrepreneurs. And the primary service groups are people of color, women, and other marginalized populations. They provide a licensed facility for cooks to prepare and distribute their offerings. Thank you for the work you do, Marty's. So this is a place to start. This is just one of a handful of shared kitchens in the Atlanta area. If you are making cottage foods, if you're processing foods, it is worth it to check out that shared kitchen option. Side note, I think it's Prep Atlanta, the prepatl.com. That's in Tucker. It's fairly new, and it also has a, it looks like a small market, almost like Krog Street Market or Sweet Auburn Market kind of style with food vendors. So you can go eat there too. All right, I digress again. And then if you're in that last everything and the kitchen sink bucket, are you selling honey, eggs, meat, or dairy? In the state of Georgia, honey requires a food sales establishment license if anyone else sells your honey. But if you're selling your honey, that may not apply. For eggs, an egg candling course is required for any egg sales. And know the egg law. There's an egg law in Georgia, but an egg candling course, it's completely free, but it is at the Georgia Department of Agriculture scheduling at their availability. But that candling course is required for egg sales, and know the egg law too. It's its own law. With meat processing, animal processing and sales of meat, to me, become the most intricate and tedious to follow what expectations are where almost of any of these farm products or processed foods you can sell. So the United States Department of Agriculture and the Georgia Department of Agriculture are going to be involved with meat sales. And then with dairy, I put a link. Let me click it and remind myself what it is. But I do want to, I'm purposely digressing right now to point out that raw milk was just legalized in Georgia, and sales of raw milk will be legal as of July 1st, 2023. I just thought that was an interesting tidbit that popped up when I was doing this research. So let's see. I put a link to in the dairy section to point out that the Georgia Department of Agriculture has its own dairy program. And this is kind of a reminder too of how many resources there are out there. Go to the Georgia Department of Ag's website, start looking around. If it's confusing at first, keep looking around. One day you're going to be comfortable with it and you're gonna be like, oh yeah, that, and that. And that's the goal. As a farm entrepreneur, you want to be that confident about the things, the rules, the regulations, the licensing that applies to what you're doing on your farm, to what's in your business plan. I also love that on this site, they have a farmer and a farmer support program. You are not alone. You are not alone. You are not alone. Market losses are real. It's a struggle. Care for yourself. Mad props to the Department of Ag for putting that out there as a resource, in addition to everything else that goes into being a dairy farmer. And I have another link. This is for the everything but the kitchen sink slide. And yet another reminder of how many resources are out there on the Georgia Department of Ag's website. They have all the rules for retail food establishments, licensing, food manufacturing, retail food sales, cottage food regulations, produce safety regulations, licensing honey, small egg producers, Georgia egg law, know that egg law for selling eggs. And then seafood. I didn't even mention seafood in my food safety presentation, but it's all there, and they will point you to the federal rules where applicable. Use these resources, they're there. And if you're someone who gets on the computer, feels super bogged down by just this overwhelming availability of information, pick up the phone and call them. I'm trying to see. So this one, I don't see a phone number right away, but usually there is a name of somebody, the manager, the program associates, their telephone numbers, their fax numbers. They're easy to get in touch with, and they want to help. They want you to be successful. Their success depends on yours and vice versa, right? So there's my plug for resources again. And now I want to stress it again, that you have two strong allies to protect your farm business from a food safety nightmare. One is insurance. Stuff happens. And if stuff happens that involves foodborne illness and you make people sick, have insurance to make sure that you can cover the costs of those illnesses that you are liable for. If you are liable for any part of it, whether it be via statutory rules, statutory liability, like the statute said, if someone gets sick, it can be traced to your farm, then you are liable. Or if you are liable for negligence, if somebody gets sick and they go to court to show that you were negligent and that's why they got sick. Either way, have insurance that covers those food safety liability issues. And use these statutes. I mentioned so many statutes. We saw the rules and regulations from Georgia. We talked about federal laws. Use all of those. Know which ones apply to your business plan and use them as a guidepost for produce safety best practices. Show that you are an expert in keeping your food safe and selling food that is safe to consume for all of us. A note on insurance. Insurance is not one size fits all. Sometimes you're covered for certain things, sometimes you aren't. Make sure that when you have food safety liability insurance, that you have a plan that covers the correct product and or food safety liability that you would need. Think of hypotheticals and pose them to your insurance, to your insurance agent, and have them let you know what would happen under your plan. Ask these questions, get their emailed answers back, And I say emailed answers because it's a writing. Get their answers back in writing if you can. If they don't send you an answer in writing, if you talked on the phone, then go ahead and send them a confirmation email and say, this is my understanding of how these things would play out based on our phone call today. Can you just send me a yes or no confirmation for these things? And know your policy in and out and your coverage. Don't assume that your farm liability coverage would cover any food safety issues. Make sure you have insurance and make sure you have the right policy and plans in place for these food safety issues. And then use these statutes, use these regulations, even if you're exempt from them, as a guidepost for best practices. Put a written plan in place, mirror the FSMA requirements, participate in GAP, draft standard operating procedures, and train your employees annually, even if you're not required to by law. And I want to show a template for standard operating procedures. And I share this with the caveat that a template for standard operating procedures is only as good as it is approachable, as it's only as good as the likelihood that you will use it. So if what I show you makes you bug out, bug away, but stay in tune enough to realize you can make your own simplified version of this. This is my standard operating procedure template. You would put your farm name, just, make it yours, put a title on there, and then keep track of when you change who wrote this. If it's more than just you who's making these rules, who wrote these standard operating procedures? Have they reviewed them every time you have a new employee? Have them initial somewhere on this? Keep track of what's going on with this document, when and why and how. And then go ahead and put some preamble in there. Put the purpose, the introduction, the scope. Why are you doing this? Because you're committed to food safety. You want people to have a great experience eating your farm products. And then where did no, that's that. Oh, there we go. The specific procedure is in the middle right here. So put this specific procedure. Think about every aspect of growing food, harvesting it, packaging it, storing it. It includes cold storage. Think of every aspect of food handling and those critical points, the HACCPs. Think of all those critical points and come up with a procedure and make sure your employees or anybody who's working with you on that farm knows them if they are harvesting any food for human consumption. Create these standard operating procedures, make them available. If you're a not-for-profit farm and you have a lot of volunteers who help you harvest your food and then donate it even, make some standard operating procedures for food safety and make them available on your website and ask volunteers to initial that they read these things before they harvest food. There's lots of clever ways to get these standard operating procedures out and disseminated to volunteers, and to just make sure anybody who's on your farm knows what's expected of them when it comes to food safety, and have them state that, have them sign something that they know. And I'm wishing now that this is where I had put this slide. If you ever receive a notice of violation of one of the statutes or a licensing issue, or if anyone ever gets sick from eating your produce, pay close attention to how long you have to respond. If there are any, you have 30 days, 15 days, 6 months. 6 months is a long time. Pay attention when you receive that notice to anything that tells you how long you have to respond, and make sure you respond within those timeframes. Be diligent, and then find an attorney to help you with the next steps. If something happens and you have violated one of these statutes or somebody has gotten sick, that's a serious issue that can critically impact your farm business. So find an attorney to help you with the next steps. If it's not the law farm, let it be somebody. Find an attorney, ask these questions, have somebody step up to bat for you if something like this happens. And the takeaways from tonight. Different farm business plans drastically impact the laws, regulations, and licensing applicable to a farm. Federal and state resources are available to help you navigate those requirements. I highly, highly, highly suggest and recommend consulting with an attorney to go over your business plans to figure out the requirements and the liabilities that are all in play there. Insurance, having the right insurance, and applying statute minimums to a business plan are your greatest allies to protect your farm from a food safety nightmare. If you have more questions, or if I have brought some to the surface that weren't even there before, sign up for office hours. Georgia farmers, if you're outside of Georgia, I'm not going to be able to help you any more than this educational webinar and the Farm Commons resources. If you are in Georgia, I can help you with a one-on-one office hour. You can sign up at calendly.com/thelawfarm/office hours. If your farm operations are in Clayton, Cobb, DeKalb, Fulton, or Gwinnett counties, these office hours are completely free. If you're outside these counties, I'm offering these office hours to webinar participants for $75. It's a huge discount. If you have questions, if you've watched this webinar, reach out, sign up for office hours, and get those questions answered. I know that you went into farming because you want to see good quality, sustainable food available to more people, to all of us. You farm to feed the world, your communities, however you put that, and you want it to be safe. You want people to consume nutritious food, and you grow it in a way that you believe in. So all the steps along the process, I know that you want to do. So if you have questions, get them answered, keep doing that research on your own, and keep the food that you are getting out to the public as safe as you possibly can. And thank you for doing that hard work of growing good quality, nutritional, clean food for us to consume. Thank you.